So today we are going to go through DN15, Mahasi Sayadaw, the Great Discourse on Origination. Thus have I heard on one, this was not I'm so used to reading the same thing. Thus have I heard on one occasion. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was staying among the Kurus. There is a market town there called Dhamma. And the Venerable Ananda came to the Lord, saluted him, sat down to one side, and said, "It is wonderful, Lord. It is marvelous how profound this dependent origination is, and how profound it appears, and yet appears to me as clear as clear." Do not say that, Ananda. Do not say that. This dependent origination is profound and appears profound. It is through not understanding, not penetrating this doctrine, that this generation has become like a tangled ball of string, covered with a blight, tangled with coarse grass, unable to pass beyond states of woe, the ill destiny, ruin, and the round of birth and death. So Ananda had his experience of stream entry, and then he saw dependent origination, but he didn't see all of dependent origination. There were some things that he missed out on. And he thought, wow, this is amazing, this is profound, and it's so simple, so clear. And here the Buddha is admonishing him that, there's more to it than what you've seen. So now he's going to elucidate and elaborate on what that is. If, Ananda, you are asked, has aging and death a condition for its existence, you should answer yes. If asked, what conditions aging and death, you should answer, aging and death is conditioned by birth. What conditions birth? Becoming, or habitual tendencies, conditions birth. Clinging conditions habitual tendencies. Craving conditions clinging. Feeling conditions craving. Contact conditions feeling. Mind and body, or mentality materiality, conditions contact. Consciousness conditions mentality materiality. If asked, has consciousness a condition for its existence, you should answer yes. If asked, what conditions consciousness, you should answer, mind and body conditions consciousness. So for those of you who are familiar with the 12 links of dependent origination, which ones are missing?
Six.
And ignorance. Name and form is mind and body. Yeah. So Ananda was not able to let go of the ignorance, not able to see that, wasn't able to see formations, and wasn't able to see the six sense bases. Thus, Ananda, mind and body conditions consciousness, and consciousness conditions mind and body. There's an interdependency between mind and body and consciousness. Mind and body conditions contact, contact conditions feeling, feeling conditions craving, craving conditions clinging, clinging conditions habitual tendencies, habitual tendencies conditions birth, birth conditions aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, grief, and despair. Thus, this whole mass of suffering comes into existence. I have said birth conditions aging and death, and this is the way that should be understood. If, Ananda, there were no birth at all anywhere, of anybody or anything, of devas to the deva state, of gandhabas to the gandhava state, of yakas, of ghosts, of humans, of quadrupeds, of birds, of reptiles, if there were absolutely no birth at all of these things, then with the absence of all birth, the cessation of birth, could aging and death appear? No, Lord. Therefore, Ananda, just this is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition for aging and birth, aging and death, namely birth. I have said habitual tendencies conditions birth. If there were absolutely no habitual tendency or becoming, that is to say, becoming or coming into existence, into the world of sense desires, into the form world or the formless world, could birth appear? No, Lord. Therefore, just this is the condition of birth, namely becoming. So becoming or habitual tendencies, we use habitual tendencies as an alternate for the word bhava. Bhava can be understood in different kinds of contexts. It's basically how the mind inclines towards a specific type of birth on the macro level, from lifetime to lifetime. And there are three kinds of births or worlds. There is the sensual realms, which make up the six sensual heavens, the human realm, the animal realm, the hungry ghost realm, and the hell realms. Then there is the form realm, which is made up of the four Brahma realms, the four Brahma lokas. And then there's the formless realm, which is made up of the Arupa Brahma realms. So the Arupa Brahma realms are infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. The understanding of bhava is that it is the inclinations, the mind's inclination towards a specific type of existence. And this is understood as being dependent upon or conditioned by clinging. When there is clinging, it gives rise to an idea of a me, mine, or myself, with a library of habitual patterns of action. It's a storehouse in which there are habitual tendencies, which then, when you act from, creates the birth of action that can lead to a specific birth in a specific realm, depending upon the formations. So, when we talk about birth, we're talking about birth on the macro level as birth in any of these different realms that we've just spoken of, or the birth of action, the birth of mental, verbal, or bodily action. This action then gives rise to aging and death, or rather suffering, the whole massive suffering that we were talking about earlier. So the way to understand this is to see how clinging conditions the habitual tendencies and how craving conditions the clinging. We'll talk more about this, but just understand how these links are all interconnected. So we'll go through it further. Clinging conditions habitual tendencies. If there were absolutely no clinging, that is to say, sensual clinging, clinging to views, to rites and rituals, and to personality belief, could bhava appear? Could habitual tendencies appear? And Ananda says, no, Lord. And therefore, just this is the condition of becoming, of bhava, and that is clinging. So there are four types of clinging here that I mentioned. There's the sensual clinging, there's the clinging for views or clinging to views, and there is a clinging to rites and rituals, and the clinging to personality belief. We'll break this down a little bit more, maybe later or tomorrow, because there's so much to unpack here. But clinging is basically that mindset that says that I crave this because of so-and-so. It's the rationale behind why you're craving for something. So craving is understood as the I like it mind, I don't like it mind, or I am this mindset. That is to say, I identify with this mindset. So that is greed, hatred, delusion. That I like it or I want it, that's the greed. I don't like it, I don't want it, that's the hatred or the aversion. Or I am this, I identify with this, that's the delusion. When that happens, there is a rationale behind why you like something, or why you don't like something, or why you believe you are something. So this kind of rationale can come in the form of those different kinds of clinging. I like this because so-and-so. You know, I like peanut butter and jelly because my mom used to make it when I was going to school. I enjoy rock and roll music because that's what I heard when I was a teenager. You know, it's the rationale, it's the processing, it's the mind that comes up with associations for why the mind likes it, the associations for why the mind doesn't like it. When you have trauma, when you have PTSD, when you have certain kinds of mental, anxieties and things like that, that happens because you have certain kinds of mindsets rooted in associations. It makes an association. When you have phobias, it's because you associate something with another. This process of association is clinging. And so that initial jump into I don't like it or I like it is the craving, but the rationalizing is the clinging. And by doing the rationalizing that this is why I like it or this is why I don't like it, you have a library of habitual patterns from which you act. So those habitual patterns, those habitual tendencies are what incline you to a specific type of realm. That is to say, if you are of a mindset that likes or dislikes or identifies with the experience of the six sense bases, then your mindset will tend towards the sense realms. At death, the bhava that appears will incline the mind towards a birth that takes birth in a sensual realm. If you have jhanas and you get attached to jhanas, the first four jhanas, then when your mind passes away, when you pass away, the bhava, the mind inclines with those formations towards one of those Brahma realms associated with the jhanas. If your mind becomes attached to one of the arupa jhanas and you cling to that and you have an inclination towards that, then when you pass away, the bhava that arises will incline towards one of the arupa states and you will take birth or you will appear in one of the arupa states.
Delson, quick question. So the person who becomes Sotapanna loses the fetter of self-identity and rites and rituals. Does that mean that when they have clinging, their clinging precludes clinging to self-view and clinging to rites and rituals? Then we have two of the clingings left?
That's right. So when you become a Sotapanna, for example, you let go of clinging to personality view, as you say, and you let go of clinging to rites and rituals. When you become an Anagami, you let go of clinging to sensual experiences. And then when you become an Arahant, you let go of clinging to views, including right view. Yeah.
The rationale for clinging, is that also known as mental proliferation?
Yes.
Story that we come
Actually,
up with?
mental proliferation starts from craving and then ends in becoming. But the processing of that mental proliferation is fueled by clinging. Yeah. Okay. So, craving clings condition. Craving conditions clinging. If there were absolutely no craving, that is craving in the way of sensual craving, for sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tangibles, and mind objects, could clinging appear? And Ananda says, no, Lord. So therefore, just this is the condition of clinging, that is craving. But there's other types of craving here also. There's the craving for sensual pleasures, and then there's a craving for existence, and a craving for non-existence. This is bhavatanha, which still gives you clinging in the form of clinging to some kind of idea of an existence which leads to bhava. And then there's vibhavatanha, which is the clinging or the craving for non-existence. This is the mind that says, I don't want to be here anymore. This is the mind that says, I don't want to be this person anymore. The bhavatanha is somebody who says, I want to attain this. I want to become a millionaire. I want to become an arahant. I want to become a sotapanna. I want to attain this jhana, and so on and so forth. So this kind of craving leads to a specific type of existence.
Can you still become an arhat if you have the craving to become an arhat?
No.
Okay.
You have to let go of the craving to become an arhat, to become an arhat.
Okay. And is the process like gradual, this craving like toned down and the last chunk goes at the end, or it's just...
So in the case of the anagami, we let go of sensual craving. But there's still the craving for form realms and the craving for formless realms. This is the craving for existence. So when you let go of your attachment to the Dhamma itself, let go of your clinging to the jhanas themselves and the arupa jhanas, which means you no longer identify with them, then that's how arahatship happens. That's dependent upon the conceit. So when the conceit of I am this, this is me, this is mine comes up, where I am in this jhana and therefore this jhana feels good to me, and now, my expertise is in being in jhana or going into cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. When there's that kind of attachment, that prevents the mind from going into arahatship, letting go of that craving.
So, is the craving for either existence or non-existence essentially the same kind of unwholesome citta that for each? Is it essentially one? Is it the same?
The craving for existence
And non-existence.
and non-existence.
Is it the same craving?
It's the same kind of craving. It's just a different type of
Object.
That's it. Yeah.
It's still the I want it mine.
It's still that one.
Or I don't want it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's the other side of the same coin.
Yeah. That's right.
I just need a little bit more elaboration on the I don't want it mind with the aversion. You said the craving kind of leads you to sensual pleasures, a formless level, or formless. The aversion keeps you away from them, or how does that?
And repeat the question.
So when that way I understood is that the craving kind of ties into what kind of birth or rather realm that you are drawn to. I'm trying to see aversion. What does that lead to?
So aversion is, let's say, aversion is sort of like it's a category, and within that there are subsets. So aversion means ill will, it means anger, it means irritation, it means annoyance, it means jealousy, it means all kinds of things related to that. And when you have these kinds of subsets in the mind, that can lead to certain kinds of mind states, or that can also lead to certain kinds of becoming into one of these realms. So, for example, anger can lead to a hell realm. Jealousy can lead to a hungry ghost realm. Certain kinds of irritation and things like that. That could lead to. It's not that it would lead to or it will lead to. It's just that it has the potential to lead to. And then it says, feeling conditions craving. If there were absolutely no feeling, that is feeling born of eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, mind contact, in the absence of all feeling, with the cessation of feeling, could craving appear? No, Lord. Therefore, Ananda, just this is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition for craving, namely feeling. How is that the case? We're talking about different kinds of craving, right? We're talking about craving for existence, we're talking about craving for non-existence, and we're talking about craving for sensual experiences. When you have an experience, that is feeling, Vedana, that is the sensation that you experience. That can happen through any of the 6 sense bases. When the mind, when the light hits the eye, that's contact. When the sound hits the ears, that's contact. When the smell, the odors hit the nose, that's nose contact. When the flavors hit the tongue, that's tongue contact. When something hits the body, that's body contact. And when the thought object hits the mind, that's mind contact. Dependent upon that, there is something that arises in the form of an awareness of that. And the joining of these 3, that is to say, the I and the form, or rather the I and the form. The joining of these 2 brings about I consciousness. Likewise, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. The awareness of that. I'm only aware of the eye when I'm seeing something. I'm only aware of the ear when I'm hearing something. I'm only aware of the tongue when I'm tasting something. I'm only aware of the nose when I'm smelling something. I'm only aware of the body when something hits me, my body. I'm only aware of the mind when there's a thought, when a thought hits the mind. So that joining of the 3, that is the I, the form, and the I consciousness, is contact, the joining of these 3. Likewise for the other sense bases and the mind. From there, there's an experience that is brought about. That experience is the seeing, for example, the seeing of the tree. I am seeing this tree. That is the feeling, the Vedana. That Vedana can be pleasant, painful, or neutral. The knowing of that being pleasant, the knowing of that being painful, or the knowing of that being neutral is perception. Yesterday I was talking about when I see the tree, I see the outline, I see the shape, I see the color, I see the form. That's the Vedana. The knowing that that's the tree, that tree is green and brown, and that the specific tree is an oak tree, that is perception. That perception is rooted in memory, because I've seen it before, and so the mind, when it experiences feeling, it goes into the data bank and retrieves that information and perceives what that experience is. But what happens is when I take that personal and I see that feeling, that experience as me, mine, or myself, then there's craving that arises. This is the intersection between feeling and craving. Now there are underlying tendencies in feeling, which when acted upon give rise to a specific type of craving, whether it's craving, sensual craving, or craving for existence, or craving for non-existence, and leading to a specific type of clinging, and therefore a specific type of bhava. Those 7 underlying tendencies we'll talk about tomorrow. Those 7 underlying tendencies have to do with craving, have to do with aversion, have to do with doubt, have to do with views, have to do with becoming, have to do with conceit, and have to do with ignorance. So we'll unpack that tomorrow, because there's going to be another section under origination. Right now, I just want you to become acquainted with the different conditions or the links of dependent origination and how one leads to the other. And now there's a little bit of a turn, as it were. Here the Buddha says, and so Ananda, feeling conditions craving, craving conditions seeking, seeking conditions acquisition, acquisition conditions decision-making, decision-making conditions lustful desire, lustful desire conditions attachment, attachment conditions appropriation, appropriation conditions avarice, avarice conditions guarding of possessions, and because of the guarding of possessions, there arise the taking up of stick and sword, quarrels, disputes, arguments, strife, abuse, lying, and other evil, unskilled states. So what are these? Seeking, acquisition, decision-making, lustful desire, attachment or aversion, appropriation, avarice, guarding of possessions. What are all this?
Behaviors.
These are behaviors, these are habitual tendencies. And so they are processes within papancha, mental proliferation. So acquisition also is a form of clinging. It's a form of acquiring something, a form of associating, which then gives rise to bhava, which gives rise to habitual tendencies. This conditions the decision-making. The decision-making is also the birth of mental action. You intentionalize something and you have the birth of mental action. That can give rise to further desire, which gives rise to attachment, which gives rise to appropriation. This is me and that's yours. This is mine, that's not yours. That then gives rise to avarice. And then avarice gives rise to guarding of possessions. So in other words, when you take something personal and say that this is me, this is mine, this is myself, and you're dividing the world between what is yours and what is not yours, there is a tendency to protect what you think is yours. And because of that, there is a tendency to have aversion, and that can lead to violence. That could lead to mental violence and physical violence. And this is how wars begin. Majjhima Nikaya 18, which is the Honeyball Sutta, talks about this as well. It says, how do quarrels start? And the Buddha goes through the process of dependent origination in a similar way. And he says the clinging, the becoming, and all of these things lead to a mind that wants to defend what it thinks of itself as a self. And so when you have certain kinds of power, when you have certain kinds of wealth, you want to keep it. The mind has a tendency to say, this is my money, this is my wealth, this is my power. And therefore, the mind creates borders and boundaries and says, this is mine, this is me, this is myself. And anyone else outside of this who tries to tamper with it is an enemy. And so now that enemy becomes a target of your aversion. And then that turns into arguments, that turns into debates, that turns into harsh speech, and that can even turn into violence and harming and killing. I have said all these evil, unskilled states arise because of the guarding of possessions. For if there were absolutely no guarding of possessions, would there be the taking up of stick or sword? No, Lord. Therefore, Ananda, the guarding of possessions is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition for all these evil, unskilled states. I have said, avarice conditions the guarding of possessions. Appropriation conditions avarice. Attachment conditions appropriation. Lustful desire conditions attachment. Decision-making conditions lustful desire. Acquisition conditions decision-making. Seeking conditions acquisitions. I have said craving conditions seeking. If there were no craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, or craving for annihilation, would there be any seeking? No, Lord. Therefore, Ananda, craving is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition for all seeking. Thus, these two things become united in one by feeling. I have said contact conditions feeling. Therefore, contact is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition for feeling. Mind and body conditions contact. By whatever properties, features, signs, or indications the mind factor is conceived of, would there, in the absence of such properties pertaining to the mind factor, be manifest by grasping at the idea of the body factor? Or in the absence of any such properties pertaining to the body factor, would there be any grasping at sensory reaction on the part of the mind factor?
No.
No. Now let's unpack this, because that is,
repeat that.
yeah, that's a lot, isn't it? Let's take it bit by bit. All right. So he says, by whatever properties of features, signs, or indications the mind factor is conceived of, would there, in the absence of such properties pertaining to the mind factor, be manifest any grasping at the idea of the body factor? Now we're talking about mentality. Now, within mentality, mentality grasps at materiality through the six sense basis. And it is housed in materiality. So what is mentality? Do you remember the 5 factors of mentality?
Feeling, perception, intention,
Yeah.
attention,
Yeah.
and
Contact. Okay? Contact, feeling, perception, intention, and attention. Those are the 5 factors of mentality. It is through this that you experience the body. So if this was not possible, could you experience the body? No. Or in the absence of any such properties pertaining to the body factor, would there be any grasping at sensory reaction on the part of the mind factor? No. Why? What is the body made up of? 4 elements. That is earth, fire, air, water. This is the 4 states of matter. Another way of understanding is the 4 states of matter, or 4 qualities. There's solidity in the earth, there's fluidity in the water, there's temperature and heat in fire, and there's movement in air. So this comprises also the 4 states of matter as we understand in terms of solid, liquid, gaseous, and plasma. Plasma is not the plasma blood, but plasma in terms of fire, heat, energy. So these make up the body. These constitute what is just this body itself, this meat packet here, right? Only from this could you experience the mental factors of mentality. If you didn't have the body, the mind wouldn't be able to have sensory reactions. Why? Because the body is also the eye. The body is also the physical ear, the physical nose, the physical tongue, the physical skin, the body, and the physical brain through which the mental factors experience the sensory experiences. Is everybody with me so far? Okay. Good. Then, Ananda, just this, namely mind and body, is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition for all contact. I have said consciousness conditions mind and body. If consciousness were not to come into the mother's womb, would mind and body develop there? Or if consciousness, having entered the mother's womb, were to be deflected, would mind and body come to birth in this life? And if the consciousness of such a tender young being, boy or girl, were thus cut off, would mind and body grow, develop, and mature?
No.
No. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about consciousness in the form of the Gandharva. That's the consciousness that carries forward formations. And then there is a nama rupa, or a nama, if you are in a formless form. And that consciousness descends in the nama rupa at the point of conception, let's say in the human birth. But if these 3 were not possible, that is to say, the sperm and the ovum, and the union of those 2, then would consciousness be able to descend into that life?
No.
No. So you need these 3. And then later on, if, as he says, in the womb, if that fetus were somehow to be stillborn or hurt or harmed, and if there was a destruction of that fetus, would the consciousness still remain? No.
How exactly does a consciousness go inside of a fertilized egg?
So the idea is that when you have formation, this is how karma on the macro level works. When a person dies, they go through a process of experiencing certain kinds of mental thoughts and ideas and images. These mental thoughts, ideas, and images are conditioned by formations. Formations are sankharas, mental impressions. These mental impressions come about because of certain continual actions, wholesome or unwholesome. If somebody has been doing unwholesome actions for most of their life, what are their habitual tendencies going to be like? Unwholesome. If their habitual tendencies are going to be mostly unwholesome, their mind will incline towards unwholesome images. So the birth of mental action there will be unwholesome images. There will be a reaction to those unwholesome images in the form of some kind of aversion. That aversion, the fuel of that craving, attaches itself to that image. That gives rise to certain kinds of formations. These sankharas are the seeds for that new life, in terms of the karma for that new life. So it gives rise to a certain type of consciousness. That consciousness departs from that death or that body and then takes root in a new body. But that new body is the union of these three. That is the mother and the father. And the union of the consciousness to that will give life. If the union of the mother and father are there, but there's no consciousness, then there won't be new life there. So these are dependent for the life to come into being. Now, when that consciousness comes into being, or this lands or descends into the new mentality and materiality, it takes with it, it transfers with it all of the karmic formations from the previous life. This is how it is understood. And so, how is it that it takes it to a specific type of Nama-rupa? It's through the karma. It's through the formations. It matches certain genetic markers in the mother and the father, like that. There's no delay there. It matches with that, and so the union of the mother and father provide for that consciousness and those formations a perfect match so that the karma can be played out in that process.
It still seems like a logical leap right there.
It's a logical leap. It's a logical leap.
Okay.
This part is very esoteric. Yeah. But you see this in certain suttas referred to as the Gandhava. That Gandhava is the consciousness that carries forward the karma. So this is something that you can only experience when you see for yourself through past lives and things like that. So until then, you can take it for what it's worth. So, it says here, therefore Ananda, excuse me, therefore Ananda, just this, namely consciousness, is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition of mind and body. I have said mind and body conditions consciousness. If consciousness did not find a resting place in mind and body, would there be subsequently an arising and coming to be of birth, aging, death, and suffering? No. Therefore, Ananda, just this, namely mind and body, is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition of consciousness. So for the mind and body to grow, it needs consciousness. But for consciousness to continue, it needs a mind and body to house itself. Therefore, Ananda, just this, namely mind and body, is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition of consciousness. Thus far, then, Ananda, we can trace birth and decay death and falling into other states and being reborn, thus far extends the way of designation, of concepts. Thus far is the sphere of understanding. Thus far the round goes, as far as can be discerned in this life, namely to mind and body together with consciousness. Now it takes a different path. It says, in what ways, Ananda, do people explain the nature of the self? Some declare the self to be material and limited, saying myself is material and limited. Some declare it to be material and unlimited. Some declare it to be immaterial and limited. Some declare it to be immaterial and unlimited, saying myself is immaterial and unlimited. So, material and limited is the idea that the self is made up of matter. That is, the body is the self and it's limited. Material and unlimited is that it's made up of all of this. The self is all of this matter. That is to say, the entire universe is the self. Immaterial and limited. That is to say, there is a self in the body which is an Atma, which is a spirit that resides in the body. Immaterial and unlimited. There is this idea that there is a super spirit that pervades the entire universe. That is the substratum of the entire universe. Whoever declares the self to be material and limited considers it to be either now or in the next world, thinking, though it is not so now, I shall acquire it there. That being so, that is all we need say about the view that the self is material and limited, and the same applies to the other views. So much Ananda for those who proffer an explanation of the self. In what ways, Ananda, do people regard the self? They equate the self with feeling. They say, feeling is myself, or feeling is not myself. Myself is impercipient, or feeling is not myself, but myself is not impercipient. It is of a nature to feel. So these are the different kinds of self-views in relation to feeling. That is to say, to very much simplify that language, it basically is self is me, or rather feeling is me, or feeling is self. Feeling is in self, and therefore it can't be perceived. It's impercipient. Or the feeling is outside of the self, and so it is owned by the self. Or the feeling is separate to the self. There's a self and there is a feeling. You can apply this to any of the five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, formations, or consciousness. So these are the 20 different types of self-views, which we'll talk about. But just to get an idea of, the 20 types of self-view are basically the five aggregates multiplied by the 4 types of basic self-views. That is, for example, the 5 aggregates are me, the 5 aggregates are self, the 5 aggregates are in the self, or the self is in the 5 aggregates, or the 5 aggregates are separate from self. Okay, now he'll break it down even further. He says, now Ananda, one who says, feeling is myself, should be told, there are 3 kinds of feeling, friend: pleasant, painful, and neutral. So there are 3 kinds of feeling: pleasant, painful, and neutral. Which of the 3 do you consider to be yourself? Which self are you guys? Are you a pleasant feeling? Are you a painful feeling?
Depends who you ask.
So it says, when a pleasant feeling is felt, no painful or neutral feeling is felt, but only the pleasant feeling. When a painful feeling is felt, no pleasant or neutral feeling is felt, but only the painful feeling. And when a neutral feeling is felt, no pleasant or painful feeling is felt, but only neutral feeling. Now, pleasant feeling is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, bound to decay, to vanish, to fade away, to cease. So too are painful feeling and neutral feeling. So I have to unpack this a little bit. Maybe you already understand this, but in the Indian culture, ancient Indian culture, there was this idea of a self, this idea of an Atma, or this idea of an Atma and Brahman, which is the self in some traditions. And the idea is that which is the self is always there. It's permanent. It's all-pervading. It's unchanging. And it is a source of happiness. So this is the touchstone upon which we can judge whether feeling is self or not self. Once we understand what do they mean by self in this Indian context. What they mean by self is that which is permanent, a source of happiness, and basically all-pervading. So, it says here, pleasant feeling is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, bound to decay, to vanish, to fade away, to cease. So too are painful feeling and neutral feeling. So anyone who, on experiencing a pleasant feeling, thinks this is myself, must, at the cessation of that pleasant feeling, think myself has gone. And the same with painful and neutral feelings. Thus, whoever thinks feeling is myself is contemplating something in this present life that is impermanent, a mixture of happiness and unhappiness, subject to arising and passing away. Therefore, is it fitting to maintain feeling is myself?
No.
No.
What is the fluctuation of pleasant and unpleasant and neutral feeling, the process?
How would you say that's self?
The movement, the process, the system.
But that system is dependent on something. What we're saying is this self is all-pervading, permanent, independent, and a source of happiness, unchanging. But that process is continually changing. This process that we're talking about is dependent origination. That is, contact gives rise to feeling. So a new kind of contact will give rise to a new kind of feeling. So it's dependently arisen. If it's dependently arisen, then it's not independent of that process. But the process itself is made up of different causes, conditions, and components. And so those are always changing anyway. So can it be said that it's self?
So are you saying that self is a process rather than an entity? If that's the argument.
Well, you could say that the idea of a self arises dependent upon that process. But that self will also go away once that process goes away. So the idea of a self comes to be in habitual tendencies. It's in the library and storehouse of different habitual tendencies. This idea that this is me, this is mine, this is myself, comes at the point of bhava, at the point of becoming. So there is that sense of self, but it changes. It continues to change because it's dependent upon clinging, dependent upon creating. So a self arises, but it also passes away. So it can't be understood to be as that self that is permanent and unchanging.
So that means there is a self if you see it as an impermanent self that comes and goes.
But it's not yourself. It's not you. It's still an impersonal process. But that self that arises also passes away. So if it passes away, you can't say that I passed away. You can't say I arose and I passed away.
I think this is a little digressing from the Sutta, but in the Vedanta philosophy, they have that Satchitanand,
Yes.
which I don't know how that ties into the
That ties into Satchitananda, right? So Sat means all pervading, always there.
Yeah.
It's existence. Chit is its conscious,
Yeah.
and Ananda means it's a source of happiness.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about.
So
That's the touchstone of the self.
But it doesn't tie to a person as a self. It just thinks that there is something beyond an individual, and that is such. And that's I'm very naive, and this is a mother talking about Vedanta.
No,
Yeah.
it's fine.
But that was my understanding, is that there is this all-pervading consciousness which
Yeah.
is pure and happy.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
not tied to a personal self.
Yes, but there, within certain schools of Vedanta, depending upon the kind of school the person subscribes to, there's Advaita Vedanta, which is the non-dual. There's the Dvaita Vedanta, which says there's a self and there's a Brahman, that's also known as Brahman. Or there's a Vishishta Advaita, or there is Veda Advaita Vedanta. There's so many different classes and schools. But basically all of them say that there is a self and there is a universe, there's an existence. Some say that that self and that existence is one and the same, and some say that that self is a manifestation of that existence. Or some say that that self merges to become that existence, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, whether you say it one way or the other, the idea is, if it's the self or the Brahman, we're talking about the same core concept. And that core concept is the idea that it is all-pervading, permanent, and therefore a source of happiness. It's always blissful. But this process that we see of the arising and passing away of selves also give you painful feelings, also give you neutral feelings. So pleasant feeling changes, and therefore it is inherently painful. Painful feeling changes, and so it's inherently pleasant. And because it's changing, it's impermanent. And that which is impermanent can be a source of dukkha, can be a source of suffering. And therefore, if we say that self is supposed to be Satchitananda, supposed to be Ananda, then that particular thing is not self. So if form is impermanent, if feeling is impermanent, if perceptions are impermanent, if intentions are impermanent, and if consciousness or awarenesses are impermanent, then they are all seen as being liable to change, and therefore can be sources of dukkha, and therefore not always providing fulfilling lasting happiness, and because of that, not considered to be self. So the Buddha doesn't go on to say that there is a self or that there is no self. Somebody asks him that question directly, and they say, what do you say? Do you say that there is a self or there is no self? And the Buddha doesn't answer either way. Because if he says that there is a self, then the mind conceptualizes, oh, then this is my self. And if he says that there is no self, then the mind makes that no self-concept a self. The mind says, oh, there is no self. And so there's a clinging to that view. What the Buddha is talking about when he says anatta, which is the Pali, and anatma, which is the Sanskrit, he's saying, what is not self? What is non-self? What is impersonal? And so all conditioned things are impermanent, and therefore they are considered not to be self. But he never makes any ontological claims, because every time they come to ask him about ontological claims, all he says is, I teach two things, suffering and the cessation of suffering. The rest of whether there is a self or not a self gets into an intellectual exercise, which leads to suffering.
So is the mistake that we make in this human life that we assume there's a permanent self, and then from the standpoint of the links of dependent origination, we kind of pick our favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am these views,
Mm-hmm.
Like I am Catholic and this is the right way to view the world, blah, 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 blah. Or, I'm always angry. That's just how I am. That
Yes.
this is my craving, or these are my reactions, or I always feel this way about whatever it is. And so
Yeah.
we kind of pick and choose these things and make a hodgepodge of some kind of self.
Which is
view.
that bhava. So going back to the links of dependent origination, let's say, for example, you know, somebody craves for peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Strawberry ice cream. Somebody craves for strawberry ice cream. And then they cling to the idea, I like strawberry ice cream because that's what my mother used to give me.
That's all I eat.
That's all I eat now. And therefore I am someone who likes strawberry ice cream. If you take away that from me, then there's cause of suffering for that. So the idea of collecting favorites, this is my favorite flavors, these are my favorite ideas, these are my favorite songs, this is clinging. And then the library of that creates a sense of, I am the person who likes this. You take it away from me, take away the strawberry ice cream, I'm going to kill you. That is the birth of action that leads to suffering.
So any identification, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Buddhist teacher, I'm a meditator, I'm a Sotapanna with fruition. These are all, according to what you're saying, this argument always ends up in suffering.
Yes. So when you identify with anything at all, including the Dhamma, it can lead to suffering.
And this is happening hundreds of thousands of times a second?
Yes. Thereabouts.
I have one more follow-up question on that. In some of the Thai traditions, they talk about purifying the chitta.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to understand that the chitta and consciousness, sometimes they are
Interchangeable.
they used
Yeah.
interchangeably, and
Yeah.
even some of the sutta talks about purifying the chitta.
Yeah.
And when the chitta is fully pure, you have attained,
Yeah.
I think.
The Buddha talks about this. He talks about the mind being luminous. He says, Pabhasara Chitta. And Pabhasara Chitta is actually the quiet mind. The experience of quiet mind that you have in either perception or non-perception is Pabhasara Chitta. And what he says is this Pabhasara Chitta becomes defiled. Defiled by anger, defiled by craving, defiled by lust, defiled by so on, so on, so on. But he never says anything about Chitta itself being permanent.
Okay.
Yeah.
This must be my understanding, but some of the
That was
talks I've heard is like they say when the
Yeah.
chitta is completely purified, you are become an arhat.
You have become?
You are an arhat. That was my understanding, and
Yeah.
it comes from.
No, that's true. When your chitta is completely purified, that is to say your mind is completely free, a mind without craving, if you will.
Shameless plug.
Then you're an arhat. But that mind of the arhat itself is empty of any concept of permanence or impermanence or anything. It's permanent to the extent that it is unshakable. Nibbana, for example, is seen as unconditioned.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's not impermanent because it changes the mindset. It gives a different quality that is unshakable. That is, that you're not liable to fall from. In that sense, it's permanent. But beyond the concepts of permanence in terms of it is everlasting and it goes beyond death and so on, it's not the case. Oh, somebody else had a question, is it? Or no?
You answered it.
Oh, okay, good. So, but anyone who says, feeling is not myself, myself is impercipient, should be asked, if friend, no feelings at all were to be experienced, would there be the thought, I am? To which he would have to reply, no. Therefore, it is not fitting to maintain, feeling is not myself, myself is impercipient. Why? What does impercipient mean? Non-perceivable. What does that mean? No perception.
Can't find it.
Right. But that means that it's not being able to perceive. You're not able to perceive the self. But isn't perception tied to feeling? Right? When what you feel, you also perceive. So what he's saying is, If, friend, no feeling at all were to be experienced, would there be the thought, I am? When you go into the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, do you have a sense of I am in perception?
No.
No.
So
I've been
no
told.
is the answer.
No is the answer. Is that?
Like, so I've been told.
Anyone who asks, feeling is not myself, but myself is not impercipient. Myself is of a nature to feel, should be asked, well, friend, if all feelings absolutely and totally ceased, could there be the thought, I am this?
No.
Therefore, it is not fitting to maintain feeling is not myself, but myself is not percipient, but myself is of a nature to feel. That means the self is something that is dependent upon some kind of a feeling. The self only arises if there's some kind of feeling that arises. If all feelings disappeared with that idea in mind, would there be a self? It wouldn't be. So one way to look at it is there is impermanent selves. There's millions of impermanent selves arising and passing away. But that couldn't be considered to be the self as we understand it in Indian context, which is that Satchitananda, that blissful, peaceful, all-pervading awareness, as it were.
So we're talking in absolute terms. And so, but there is the relative self.
Yeah, the relative self is that which arises through the process of dependent origination.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what you were talking about, the process.
Yeah,
It is the process of a
this
relative
mass
self.
here,
Yeah.
that's messing with
Yeah.
this, they're talking.
Yes, but it continues to arise and pass away. That self, it continues to rise and pass away. That's the thing. From the time, Ananda, when a monk no longer regards feeling as the self, or the self as being impercipient, or as being percipient and of a nature to feel, by not so regarding, he clings to nothing in the world. Not clinging, he is not excited by it. He has dispassion. And by not being excited, he gains liberation. And he knows birth is finished, the holy life has been led, done was what had to be done, there is nothing more here. Now he gives another kind of idea. And if anyone were to say to a monk whose mind was thus freed, that the Tathagata exists after death, that would be seen by him as a wrong view and unfitting. Likewise, the Tathagata does not exist. Both exists and does not exist. Neither exists nor does not exist after death. Why so? As far, Ananda, as designation and the range of designation reaches, as far as language and the range of language reaches, as far as concepts and the range of concepts reaches, as far as understanding and the range of understanding reaches, as far as the cycle reaches and revolves, that monk is liberated from all of that by super knowledge. And to maintain that, such a liberated monk does not know and see would be a wrong view and incorrect. So there's this idea, there's other suttas in which, people ask the monks, so what is it? Does the Tathagata exist, or does the Buddha exist? Does the Arahant exist, or does the Arahant not exist? Or does the Arahant exist, or it does not exist? Or does the Arahant neither not exist nor not, that whole thing, neither exist nor not exist? So the idea is, first of all, let's define what does that mean in terms of a being. There's a concept of a being from the Pali word satta, or sattva in Sanskrit. And the Buddha says the idea of a being is that idea of clinging to or clinging for form, feeling, perception, intention, and consciousness. That identification process with that denotes a being. So if an Arhat has let go of all identification with form, feeling, intention, perception, consciousness, is he a being?
Got me.
Yes. Exactly. You see how it is? It's like,
Yeah,
if you say he's not a being, but then,
yes.
yeah, you can't say he's not a being.
So that's an understanding. But there's two kinds of experiences, through understanding and through development.
Yeah.
Now, through development, can that be known?
Through development, it can be known that the Arhat is neither a being nor not a being.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is cool.
Yes.
Well, I think it's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that is interesting.
Ananda, there are 7 stations of consciousness and 2 realms. Now what he's talking about are the different types of rebirths. Now this is where we'll talk about the things that you guys want to talk about. Which are the 7? There are beings different in body and different in perception, such as human beings, some devas, and some in states of woe. So the idea is there are different beings with different bodies. We all have different bodies. Devas have different bodies. Animals have different bodies. We also have different perceptions. We perceive differently depending upon our formations. So that's the classification. There are beings who are different in body and different in perception. There are beings different in body and alike in perception, such as the devas of Brahma's retinue, born there on account of having attained the first jhana. In the Brahma realm, it's understood that the beings have the same kind of body, and they also have the same kind of perception, because they are all experiencing the first jhana. They're all experiencing thinking and examining thought. They're all experiencing bliss and ease. And they all have bodies that are alike. All of them. So this is the 2nd station. There are beings alike in body and different in perception, such as the Apasara Devas. This is the 2nd jhana now. How is it that they are alike in body but different in perception? Because in some cases there are beings still with a little bit of thinking and examining thought. So they still have certain kilesas, as they're known, of thinking. They still have some process of verbalizing going on. And so that's how their perceptions are different. Yeah.
So this is an area I haven't studied at all, so I'm very naive. How do devas come into existence, and how do they have bodies, and where do they have bodies? Do they have parents? Do they gestate? I mean, just kind of in general terms.
The understanding within the Buddhist cosmological context is we have different types of birth. We have birth through gestation. We have birth through an egg. We have birth through moisture. And we have birth through spontaneous generation. Devas spontaneously generate. They just spontaneously come into being dependent upon previous karma.
And where are they?
They can be in any...
location?
Oh, on this plane here? You mean here on Earth?
Yeah, where are they? Yeah.
They're everywhere.
They're just behind the scenes.
Yeah, don't you see them? They're right here.
I had one put a peppermint in my car the other day. Okay.
So they are, okay, so the way to understand it is we only see certain kinds of frequencies of light, certain kind of spectrum. They come into the scope of outside of that spectrum. That's why we have to develop the inner vision to be able to see them, if we want to see them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in the Buddhist cosmology, is there, more than one Earth, or is Earth it? Is this Earth it? Are devas born in other parts of the galaxy or the universe? Or am I just being?
No, I can answer that.
I mean, yeah.
So there's an understanding that there are different kinds of world systems, different kinds of chakrawallas, they're known as. There is the 100 world system, the 1,000 world system, the 10,000 world system, and the 10,000 times 10,000 world system. And these are the different designations of solar systems and galaxies and clusters of galaxies and universes or multiverses. And so what's understood is there is different, in every galaxy, there's different devas. So it's not only horizontal in terms of the different clusters, but vertical. So classification of beings are also in different galactic realms.
That gets to answering some detailed questions I had before about population. So we have a burgeoning population of humans, we have a decreasing population of animal life, but it doesn't matter because there's 10,000 times 10,000 universes. They could be anywhere. You could go anywhere.
You can go anywhere.
Okay.
Majority of beings are in hell.
I like the drama.
Yeah.
Majority in hell.
Yeah.
Majority or where?
The majority of beings are in hell,
Are in hell. Oh,
unfortunately.
but this isn't hell.
Well, this plane, I would say, is a very beautiful hell, or very terrible heaven. Other people have questions?
Can you see devas right now, and like here?
If I could, and I told you I could, would you believe me?
Yeah, I would like to. But I wanna, like, if you can describe.
So the devas, when they appear, they're understood as balls of light. They're spheres of light. And then eventually you're able to see the outline of the deva. And then eventually you start to see the features of the deva. But devas have different kinds of nervous systems, let's say. They experience more pleasure than they would experience pain. Their nervous systems are geared to experience more pleasure. They're luminous beings, so they don't have like this meat bag here. It's more luminous in nature.
Like photons.
Like photons, yeah.
Some are floating on it.
Well, they could be standing right here,
Why are most beings in hell, and where is that from?
Could you repeat that, please? Question.
Why are most beings in hell, and where is that from? Because most beings don't have right view. So within the Buddhist cosmology, the idea is that very few beings, in the grand scheme of things, have developed, cultivated, and attained right view. And if you don't have right view, you are liable to experience hell realms, or a Kambikos realm, for example. So the balance of beings, in that sense, majority of them are hell, and then some are in the human realms, and then some are in the deva realms. And how do you get to the deva realms? No. We're talking about the 6 sensual realms, 6 sensual heavens. When you have generosity, when you have loving kindness, when you have compassion, when you develop your precepts and continue to maintain those precepts, the idea is that you can get into a deva realm. But you can still have wrong view, and when you finish your time in a deva realm, you go all the way back to a hell realm. So when you have right view, when you have stream entry, then those 3 realms of the hungry ghost, the animal, and the hell realms are completely cut off. And how many stream enterers are actually in this world compared to, you know, the quintillions and quintillions of beings in samsara. So that's just under the cosmological perspective.
So who figured this out, that most of them are in hell, and also who's going in there to take them out?
Nobody's going in there to take them out. How they leave is through their karma. So when their karmic fuel is gone, they generate somewhere else. So if there's still, because there's not always just absolute bad or absolute good until you completely let go of all identification. But if you have absolute bad, then that means there's no possibility for you to come out of hell. So there's still formations that are rooted in goodness, that are rooted in the wholesome, that allow the person to, once they've finished their jail time, then they go out, and then whatever formations are there will give rise to whatever birth is there. So then they can go from the hell realm to a hungry ghost realm, or a hungry ghost realm to an animal realm, or an animal realm to a human realm. Wow. Yeah.
So within Buddhist cosmology, I'm very familiar, there is this cadence of a Buddha arising only one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've never found, and I've been curious about, is if there's any canonical description of, is that saying that you can only have one Buddha on earth at a time, or like one Buddha in the universe or in the realm? Like, are there multiple Buddhas, but those populations are just not aware of each other?
Yeah, so I think the Theravada understanding, the purely Theravada understanding, is that there cannot be one Buddha, there cannot be more than one Buddha at a time in any part of the universe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there some logic? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Why?
Did you ask the same question? What? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
I'm just wondering why. Is it, I mean, what is the logic for why you can never have more than one Buddha?
I think it's more of a doctrinal thing.
It's spontaneous and just make it up.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It could be a doctrinal thing. Because you have Mahayana understanding that there's other Buddhas everywhere.
Okay, so it's just
it's a doctrinal sort of, yeah, that's, we made it up basically.
I'm going to add a follow-on question. So one of the questions I'm going to ask you eventually anyway, so maybe more than once, is how do you distinguish the things that Buddha proved from the things that he or other people hallucinated? And because they're all pronounced like they're true, and we're all supposed to believe the Buddha, but you know, you get into the fourth jhana, you see all sorts of weird stuff.
Yeah.
You know, you get, you know, you see strength, and what is a belief and what is a.
So when it comes to cosmology and when it comes to the idea of rebirth as well, I would say don't take it. Just don't take it for what it is. You don't even have to go into that perspective that it is real or it isn't real. It's just a wonderful, unique, rich addition to understanding karma. But these can also be understood on psychological levels too. You could experience hell on a psychological level. You could experience the Brahma realms on a psychological level by virtue of the fact that you experience the first, second, third, and fourth jhana. Likewise with the Arupa realms and so on. So when somebody is generous, somebody is more giving, somebody is more loving, somebody is more kind, they have a deva kind of psychology. And somebody is more greedy, somebody is more jealous, somebody is addicted, they have a more hungry ghost kind of psychology. Somebody who has more anger, more ill will, prone to violence, they have a hellish kind of psychology and so on. So I would say that, this is all a wonderful, rich tapestry, but at the same time, it can be understood as a way of understanding our own psychology.
Okay, so when it says that you have to, one of the things we're supposed to do is to believe the Buddha.
Yeah.
So, but we don't have to believe all this about the hell realms and other things. It's just suffering and
the end of suffering.
Yeah, the end of suffering is enough.
Yes.
Okay.
You had a question? I'll look into you guys.
So, if I work really hard in this lifetime but never attain stream entry, and then somehow I go to hell realm, or some bad realm, and then I go back to becoming human later, how can I possibly remember Dhamma? Like, how does that process work? Like, am I just things?
Do I what?
Is that like if you somehow doesn't attain stream entry in one lifetime, how do you continue the Dhamma path if that's the case?
Or is she doomed, she said?
Yeah.
Oh, no, you're not doomed. You're not doomed. What happens is, the karma is such an interesting and intricate kind of concept. So the idea is that there will always be formations rooted which lead to the Dhamma. So you'll come into circumstances and situations, or you'll be born in a family of Dhamma followers, or you'll come across friends who practice the Dhamma, or you'll suddenly watch YouTube and see a Dhamma video, or something like that.
That kind of sort of assumes this itself, like how does that information stored in the karma?
It's in the formations, in the sankharas. Sankharas are the codes. Those are the inputs through which then all of these other karmic actions come to be. But sankharas in of themselves are impermanent. They're ever changing and they're influenced by choices. Choices you make will influence the next set of sankharas that come into a future time period. So that's why they can't be considered to be permanent. They can't be considered to be just like the self. They're considered to be changing because your intention continues to change. Your actions and your thoughts continue to change. And so they continue to develop, or rather influence, the next arising of the sankharas in a future moment. And then that cycle continues and continues and continues until you purify the formations, until the formations are rid of craving and conceiving views and identification.
So what carries from one moment to the next moment is the sankhara.
It's a sankhara, but it changes. It can change.
So the sankhara stores the information of many lifetimes before?
Not just one sankhara, there's multiple sankharas. And there are three, well, it depends on who you ask, but there can be 4 or 5 different types of sankharas. But the 3 main types of sankharas are mental sankharas, verbal sankharas, and bodily sankharas. And these influence what you say, the verbal sankharas. The mental sankharas influence how you think. And the bodily sankharas basically determine your breathing pattern and different aspects of your body. There's Ayu Sankhara, which is known as a sankhara that influences your age, how fast you age, the aging process, and when you're done. So sankharas are the fuel for existence, whether it's in physical existence or otherwise.
Do you like the word construction, or an English word to approximate sankhara?
Yeah, construction is a good word because it's what constructs, the whole process. It builds, it adds to it. That's a good word for sankharas. Another one would be formations, but another one would be preparations.
Yeah.
Or even the original Sanskrit samskaras, which are impressions, mental impressions, verbal impressions, that kind of stuff. Okay, so you.
Quick question regarding divas. Are they all good? all the devas are good, and then you said that they're spheres of light and at a certain frequency. Would an infrared camera be able to pick them up? And then if they do visit you, is that a good thing or is that bad?
Okay, let's unpack what you said. So number one, devas can experience anger. But then the understanding, again, all of this is within cosmology, right? So take it for what it's worth. Devas can experience anger, and that anger can make them explode. So physically explode. And that's how they die. That's it, that's the end of the deva. If they experience any kind of negative emotion, it can intensify and it can kill them. But devas are inherently good, in the sense that they're more predominantly good. They're predominantly more generous. It's by virtue of the fact that in a previous life they were generous, they were kind, they were compassionate, they were developing, the different wholesome qualities of mind and action. Because of that, they're kind of reaping the benefits as a deva. Now, I wonder if you could capture a deva on infrared light. That was the other question. We should try it.
We saw something in our camera. So we're asking.
Huh?
We saw something around the house with a camera that kept triggering.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it is
Unexplainable.
It is a sphere of light. So when we said sphere of light.
Yeah. It couldn't have been a firefly?
No, it's not. It's a very large sphere of light. It's like this large.
Maybe it's a very fat firefly.
It's moving.
For hours
Yeah.
and hours.
Yeah.
Stay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So, devas come to be where there's a lot of wholesome intentions, and there's a lot of wholesome qualities of mind present. So at a Dhamma talk, for example, there could be devas. When people are meditating, when people are being generous, the idea is that devas are around. And devas can also protect, that's another idea, that devas can protect those who are wholesome in mindset. And they can be playful also.
Guardian angels.
Guardian angels is one concept, exactly. You've been wanting to ask your question for a long time. Yeah.
So my understanding is that to be born a human at the time when the Buddhist dispensation is available is very rare.
Yeah.
Right? Can you develop right view without a Buddha in the world? So
without a Buddha in the world, you can develop right view so long as the Dhamma is still there, available.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
But when the Dhamma is gone, like we're halfway through the
Yeah.
period now.
Then it's a dark age, apparently.
And for a very long time.
For a long time.
Yeah.
That's why there's so many hell beings. Or that's the rationale behind that.
Okay, so do you think that, because we're like in a Catholic place here, do you think that Catholics can become devas, or because they're good?
Anyone who has good qualities.
Yeah.
Any human who has good qualities can become a deva.
So Buddhists don't
It's not,
say, oh,
yeah.
this is just for us.
No. Yeah.
They're not exclusive.
No. It's not an exclusive club.
That's good to know.
Oh wow, so many questions.
We opened a can of worms
Yeah.
here.
And I'm not even done yet. Okay.
If you enter this stream,
Yeah.
then you have 7 more lives.
Yeah.
Are your bets pretty good that those 7 lives will be before the Dhamma disappears?
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question. If you are a Buddhist, can you have a real job and a family looks like it's all clean? So how is that possible? I mean, a bank account and a job or a family, I'm talking very basic stuff.
Yeah, you can. I mean, even in the Buddha's time, there was a guy named Anandapindika who was a stream enterer, by the way. And he was, at that time, a millionaire, a banker. He's the one who donated all of that land to the Buddha. He's the one who, the story goes, you know the story about Anandapindika with the coins?
I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, paved a park or something.
What's that?
He paved a park with coins.
Yeah, he just paved the entire park with gold coins.
Gold.
Yeah.
Eventually you have to give it up.
No, he didn't give it up. He was still a millionaire. He was still a banker. Yeah. And then when he died, then he became a big man.
So many rich people in their time, they just be right livelihood, work, wealthy, and make keep the household up. So up to, I think, you can keep the household.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea because after you become an anagami, you sort of just lose interest, in any kind of household life.
Chitta.
But Chitta was still a householder as an anagami. Are there any more questions, people? I think you had a question? No. Somebody raised their hand somewhere. You did, yes.
I was wondering, are there any enlightened societies in the 3D, and would we ever need?
Are there any enlightened societies in
this universe or galaxy?
If there were, I probably wouldn't want anything to do with Earth.
Would they not want to help us though?
No, I mean, they wouldn't be interested in anything, actually. And eventually they would just die out.
So there is an issue in getting enlightened, you lose interest in it.
I mean, it could be seen as an issue for someone who has a lay life. But I think the rewards are just really nice when you become enlightened. Much better than money.
I think you answered part of my question about the earth and the human beings being born in during the time of the pleasure. I'm trying to understand, do humans exist only on the earth, or are there universes where we have beings so do they mean specifically when they say being born a human, do they specifically mean born on planet Earth, or do they mean any Earth-like planet?
Any Earth-like planet. They could be human-like beings. Could be humanoid beings, let's say. In fact, even in the cosmology, it talks about the 4 great continents. And when you look at the cosmology of the 4 great continents, the way I look at that is probably not continents, but actually planets. And there's different types of humans there, human civilizations that have different ways of living and so on and so forth. Yes?
You hear story of monks saying that they see devas that help them through whatever obstacles they have. How does the spirit of light take on a form of a body in order to help someone else? How does that work? I never understand a connection. I've always thought they were like an entity of a body and not like a frequency.
Well, how do they help them in the sense? Well, I guess you would have to give me examples of helping. Because
I know John Brown, when we went to Perth, he talked about that he hears about it and he didn't believe in it, and then one of the monks was saying that they were walking through whatever the sand and there was no water, no nothing, and someone showed up wearing really nice clothes and gave him food out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And you read these stories.
Yeah. So devas are understood to be pretty much very powerful, so that they can shapeshift. They can manifest in different realms. They can engage with the physical realm. They can, depending on what kind of deva is, you can bring things out of seemingly nowhere and all kinds of things like that. So devas are sort of almost unlimited in the ability to do things. They can read people's minds. They can walk through walls. All of the different siddhis that we hear about in the suttas, they're basically capable of that.
Where does the bodhisattvas fall into this thing?
So there is the bodhisattva in Tusita heaven, which is the future Buddha. That's the Maitreya Buddha. That is going to come after the Dhamma ceases. So once the Dhamma no longer is available to people, People forget that there was a Buddha before. People forget that there was a Dhamma before. At some point, the Maitreya Buddha will take rebirth and be a bodhisattva for one last lifetime and then become the Maitreya Buddha. So all bodhisattvas will be in two-seater heaven. That's the understanding. Most bodhisattvas will be, or all bodhisattvas will be in two-seater heaven prior to their final lifetime in which they become a Buddha.
So what's the, cosmology?
Yeah.
What's the sort of life expectancy? I think I heard something like, like 1,000 world cycles or something.
Yeah. So you're talking about in the range of hundreds and hundreds of trillions of years, depending upon which realm you're in. Yeah. You have Mahakappas, you have Kappas, you have 4 Mahakappas and things like that. Yeah. So incalculables, that's the Asankhayas.
Yeah. So, and that's the universe coming in and out of existence.
Right.
That many times.
Right. So one expansion and world contraction is a Mahakappa.
Yeah, and so we're 8 trillion years into the Big Bang and it's still going.
Right.
And then it'll contract.
Right.
And then there's a dark period.
Yeah.
Then it explodes again.
Yeah. Just goes on and on and on.
And they only happen, Buddhas only appear as the
world expands.
As it expands, not the contraction or the dark period.
Right. And all beings only appear when the world expands. Right. Not when the world contracts. Since you brought this up, there is also the idea that the universe gets destroyed by 3 elements. The water element, the water element, the earth element, the water element, the water element, the fire element, and the air element. So the idea is then, depending upon which kind of destruction happens, all of the realms up to a certain realm are completely destroyed. But any of the realms from the 3rd jhana onwards, I believe, are never destroyed. So all of that which is destroyed, the hell beings and the animals and all of that, they all take birth into the 3rd jhana realm onwards. That's a pretty good deal. Any other last questions before I continue? Yes.
Just kidding.
So, there are beings alike in body and alike in perception, such as the Suttavāda. These are the 3rd jhana Brahmaviharas, and they are alike in body and alike in perception. That means they have the same kinds of bodies and the same kind of perceptions. In the 1st jhana, you have different kinds of bodies, but the same kind of perception. In the 2nd jhana, you have beings that are alike in body, but different in perception. And here, you have beings that are both alike in body and alike in perception, meaning their radiance is basically the same. Their light is the same everywhere. And they experience the same qualities, which are the qualities or factors of the 3rd jhana. Then, so that is the 4th station. There are beings who have completely transcended all perception of matter by the vanishing of the perception of sense reactions and by non-attention to the perception of variety, thinking Space is infinite. They have attained to the sphere of infinite space. That is the 5th station. So anyone who gets to the 5th jhana, you're liable to go into infinite space, to be born as a deva in infinite space. There are beings who, by transcending the sphere of infinite space, thinking consciousness is infinite, have attained to the sphere of infinite consciousness. That is the 6th station. There are beings who, having transcended the sphere of infinite consciousness, thinking there is no thing, have attained to the sphere of no thingness. That is the 7th station of consciousness. The 2 realms are the realm of unconscious beings, and secondly, the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. So the realm of unconscious beings are known as the asanyata. They don't have perception. And the way to get into this realm, or this kind of consciousness, is someone who goes into a state of suspended animation. And then suddenly they find themselves in this realm. Of course, they're unconscious, so they don't know. So what happens is their karmic stream freezes. So all the karma and formations and all of those things that come up, it freezes at the level of the unconscious beings. And it just their lifespan, whatever it is, when it decreases and it ends, whatever formation comes up, that gives rise to a new life after that. So they have no control over where they go based on that. And neither perception or non-perception. Here, there's no intention. There's no way of fully deciphering what is there and what is not there. So the beings who experience neither perception nor non-perception go to the realm of neither perception nor non-perception.
But that's not even a being, right? It's just a frozen something from before.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so in the same way, any formations that arise will then give rise to new birth. Now, Ananda, as regards this 1st station of consciousness with difference of body and difference of perception, as is in the case of humans and so on, if anyone were to understand its origin, its cessation, its attraction, and its peril, and the deliverance from it, would it be fitting for him to take pleasure in it? In other words, once you understood the impermanent nature of being in this realm, would you take pleasure?
No.
And with regards to the other stations and the other 2 spheres? No, because they're conditioned. Ananda, insofar as a monk, having known as they really are these 7 stations of consciousness and these 2 spheres, their origin and cessation, their attraction and peril, is freed without attachment, that monk, Ananda, is called one who is liberated by wisdom. There are, Ananda, these 8 liberations. What are they? Okay, so we'll come back to liberated by wisdom. So we're going to talk about that, but let me go through this first. There are, Ananda, these 8 liberations. What are they? Possessing form, one sees forms. That is the first liberation. Not perceiving material forms in oneself, one sees them outside. That is the second liberation. Thinking it is beautiful, one becomes intent on it. That is the third liberation. These 3 liberations are all talking about the 4 jhanas. These are gateways to the jhanas, the form jhanas. Possessing form, one sees forms. What does that mean? One is looking at the different parts of the body and it gets into a jhanic realm, jhanic state. Not perceiving material forms in oneself, one sees them outside. One creates a kasina, for example, or one sees certain colors and things like that, and makes that a meditation object. That is the second liberation. Thinking it is beautiful, one becomes intent on it. This is in relation to the Brahma Viharas. One becomes intent on the beautiful, which are the Brahma Viharas, which take you all the way to the fourth jhana. Loving kindness takes you all the way to the fourth jhana. Now, by completely transcending all perception of matter, by the vanishing of the perception of sense reactions, and by non-attention to the perception of variety, thinking space is infinite, one enters and abides in the sphere of infinite space. That is the fourth liberation. By transcending the sphere of infinite space, thinking consciousness is infinite, one enters and abides in the sphere of infinite consciousness. That is the fifth liberation. By transcending the sphere of infinite consciousness, thinking there is no thing, one enters and abides in the sphere of no thingness. That is the sixth liberation. By transcending the sphere of no thingness, one reaches and abides in the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. That is the seventh liberation. By transcending the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, one enters and abides in the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. That is the eighth liberation.
Is that voidness or is it Nirodha?
We're talking about Nirodha.
Okay.
Cessation of perception, feeling,
Yeah.
and consciousness. Yeah.
Nirodha.
Yeah. So when they say liberations, what they're talking about are temporary liberations. Why? Because when you're in these states, you are liberated from the hindrances in that state. Ananda, when a monk attains these 8 liberations in forward order, in reverse order, and in forward and reverse order, entering them and emerging from them, and as and when, and for as long as one wishes, and has gained by their own super knowledge here and now, both the destruction of the taints and the uncorrupted liberation of the mind and liberation by wisdom, that monk is called both ways liberated. And Ananda, there is no other way of both ways liberated that is more excellent or perfect than this. That is what the Blessed One said, and the Venerable Ananda rejoiced and was delighted in the Blessed One's words. So
super knowledge.
Yeah.
Is that, when he said, is that like superhuman or the knowledge of
the destruction of the taints.
Okay.
Yeah. But the super knowledge can also be the 6 higher knowledges, like the 6 powers, let's say, so to speak. So that's like being able to read other people's minds, telekinesis, being able to walk on water, these kinds of miraculous kinds of powers. The divine ear, the divine eye, seeing past lives, and finally, the 6th one really is the destruction of the taints. That's the super normal or super knowledge that leads to liberation of the mind. The others are just, anybody else could do them if they wanted to. But only when you get to the destruction of the taints do you become an arhat, so to speak.
So the first ones, they can be experienced by a person who is not enlightened, a person who is not has gained to the noble path.
Yeah.
So that is, okay.
Yeah.
And so that would be what was the name of that? What was the name of that? Janagami? Would that be a Janagami?
No, Janagami is anyone who is a noble one. Sotapanna or Sakadagami, who then attains Shaka. And then because of when they pass on, there's no 5 fetters in their mind, they become an Anagami.
Okay.
That's the idea. But these are people who are ascetics or yogis.
So worldlings.
Yeah, you could say worldlings, or even yogis from the Yoga Sutras, who study the Yoga Sutras and attain siddhis and stuff like that. They can attain the 5 higher powers. But the sixth is only through the destruction of the taints. Yeah, somebody had a question. Yeah.
So in that very last sentence, is he describing, I'm hearing a couple things. The first set is the ability to go in and out of jhana and cessation at will. in any order, and then the last bit would be final liberation, seeing dependent origination, and where the Buddha is talking about seeing it forward in reverse order. That's the destruction of the taints. Is that, am I hearing all that?
That's the destruction of the taints. That's arahantship. That's somebody who is both ways liberated. That's one of the 7 types of people that I was talking about earlier. You want to take a break and we can go through it? Yeah.
What's both ways liberated again?
Huh?
Is the back and forth, is both ways liberated?
Yeah. Both ways liberated because they go back and forth and then they attain the destruction of the taints. Only then they're liberated.
Can you be one way liberated?
I'm going to explain that after the bathroom break.
You.
Is there any reason in this particular sutta Buddha didn't go all the way to ignorance?
Because he was talking to him from the perspective of what Ananda was experiencing. So he was only talking to him what Ananda experienced, not exactly the whole scheme, because he was trying to give him the perspective. But tomorrow we're going to go through all 12.
On the side story, the Buddha spoke with Ananda about all these swords and this kind of it's a household. You have possession, you have bank account, you have all these things, you have a house.
But then once you have it, then you want to protect it.
Yeah. From a practical standpoint, it's just the only way of not doing that is just be a homeless.
Yeah.
I mean, basically be a ascetic.
Yeah.
A monk, right?
That's it.
Or an equivalent.
An equivalent of such. Somebody who's a wanderer, somebody who just is depending upon the kindness of other people.
And yet, if everybody's like that, there's nobody to be in the Sangha.
That's why the Sangha is so important in terms of the lay Sangha and the monastic Sangha, so to speak. They depend on each other. The monastics depend on the lay for the requisites, and the lay depend on them for spiritual guidance and instruction.
Right. So from a practical standpoint, it's just difficult in some ways to progress at a certain level. One has to
let go of what's known as the fetters of householdship.
That's right.
Meaning, let go of the idea of you're a householder now.
And how does one do it in a practical sense? Just put everything in a trust and have somebody else manage?
Yeah, that can happen. And then they just continue studying the Dhamma, and if they want becoming a monk or whatever it might be.
Who was the teacher that you mentioned? Was in
He's not a teacher, he's a meditator. Anthony Leabeater. Yeah. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. Leabeater or Leabeater, I don't know.
In our house camera, we did catch this thing. Because we're staying somewhere else for several nights, and the camera kept beeping, catching something in motion. And what we saw on infrared was this spherical, transparent thing. It was just moving around, and I looked at later, there's nothing. No cobweb, nothing. It's on this side, it's transparent, and there's a couch in there. It doesn't look like it didn't look like a projection. Because projection, when you get into this occur, it would occur also.
Yeah.
This means away. And then it would just sometimes would fly really fast. They caught it all on camera. And just that staying there.
Do you still have the footage? Do you still have the footage?
I still have and so when I went home, I went to that site, but I don't think it was the daytime.
Yeah.
Because I usually meditate around the area, and there's also a lot of electronics. So, because for many years I practiced a lot of the vipassana, the Veda, going because I'm very sensitive to the feelings.
Yeah.
When I went to that area, I feel seeing the vibration in the area was something. The Vedana was more strong.
Yeah.
So very interesting. It didn't feel threatening anything at all.
Right.
So I just embraced it with the intention of offering and opening. And once trapped, it was like, I'll get out. It's benevolent. I welcome it.
Yeah.
And then after a while, I sat, meditated, took a nap, and then it disappeared.
Yeah.
For like 2 nights, throughout the daytime, when the light was starting out, you could still see it during the bright daylight. And then the next night, still same area.
I'd love to see that footage if you can share it sometime. Yeah. That'd be great. Yeah.
I have some other friends also.
Yeah, I had a student in Cambodia. There was a festival in Cambodia called Chunbun, which is where you offer food to the monks and other things, and then the merits are given to your loved ones who are passed away. So they had done it for transfer of merit. And so they had done it for somebody, and what they said was they saw that person in this luminous form as a deva or something on that festival when they transferred the merit. It's like they visited them or something.
Yeah.
So
devas sometimes show up as this balls of light.
Balls of light, or they can appear kind of a luminous form, like a humanoid, like a human. Yeah. So before we continue, does anybody have questions?
So, yeah, I have a question about, so is it possible to go from no jhana to the 4th jhana without going through the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd?
Yes. Yes.
I used to think the other way, you had to go through, sort of like an elevator.
Yeah.
But you can sort of arbitrarily pick and choose.
Yes. And you can also experience cessation from 1st jhana onwards. So it doesn't have to be from the base of neither perception, non-perception that the mind goes into cessation. It's just easier because the mind is very subtle. But from the 1st jhana onwards, you can experience the cessation of perception in that consciousness.
Why?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. I mean, so is that can that be done by will, or in a sense, is it a matter of sort of releasing some kind of whatever you're like, if you're focused on, or if you're experiencing equanimity, and essentially the 6-hour equanimity, and then there's nothing. That's the nirodha, that's the cessation. Is that how it works?
Yeah. You let go completely of any of the factors of the jhana.
Yeah.
And you see it from wisdom. You see it as being impermanent. You see it through the three characteristics, and then you have no clinging to that jhana, and you just stop. Okay, so Alice.
Is the tree spirit a deva?
Are there tree spirits?
Yes, and if they are deva?
The tree spirits are not exactly devas. There's yakas who live around in the forest. There's fairies. There's some very interesting characters. There's what do you call those? Nagas, yeah, which are like water spirits. They're like serpentine or reptilian in nature. And there's a lot of different kinds of, there's kinnaras, so these are all living in the vicinity of what's known as the realm of the four great kings. So they are still on the earth plane. Yeah.
Are they always benevolent? Because I
No.
tend to talk to tree spirits to
Yeah.
wonder if they're nice or not.
Most of them are nice. Yeah.
Okay, I do have another question.
Yeah.
So, do the beings in those realms, are they aware of each other? That's one question. And then my other question is, what if a person is wakes up in a realm and they go, no, this isn't right. Is there like a court of appeals? No, I had that, John.
The answer to the second question is no. The beings who are able to interact with each other, well, for example, it's like this. The understanding is, wherever you're at, you can interact with the beings in your realm, and you can go down to other realms. But you can't interact beyond them. That's why in the Brahma realm, the first Brahma realm, the first jhana realm, there's the Brahma there who thinks that he's the creator, because he doesn't realize that there's other beings beyond that. So they feel like that's it, we are the all, we are the powerful. The same with the second, the third. And by the way, the pure abodes, they are in the realm of, or within the vicinity of the realm of the fourth jhana, the fourth Brahmaloka. Okay, so we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about the 7 different types of people. You heard about 2 of them in the other sutta, which was liberated by wisdom and liberated both ways. So here we go. It's very short. This is Anguttara Nikaya, number 7, Book of Sevens, number 14. So Anguttara Nikaya 7.14. Bhikkhus, these 7 persons are worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of reverential salutation, an unsurpassed field of merit for the world. What 7? The one liberated both ways, the one liberated by wisdom, the body witness, the one attained to view, the one liberated by faith, the Dhamma follower, and the faith follower. These 7 persons are worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of reverential salutation, an unsurpassed field of merit for the world. Okay, that's it. All right, so the one liberated both ways. You already know what that is, right? Any clarification needed for that?
That's just independent origination back and forth. That's the variable.
No. The one liberated both ways is somebody who goes through the 8 jhanas and attains the destruction of the tints. But they can see independent origination, the backward and the forward and so on. But in terms of the classically understood, Sutta literature, it says they're liberated both ways because they're able to go to the 4 jhanas, first 4 jhanas, go into the arupa, attain cessation at will, and then be liberated. Meaning destruction of the tenets.
So here liberation means attaining Dhamma.
No, liberation means arahatship. Although the context can change, as you'll see as we go down. The one liberated by wisdom. This is basically somebody who goes through one of the first 4 jhanas and attains the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, and then attains the destruction of the tenets.
Would that be like a dry, you call it dry arahant?
Yeah, you could call it that. Yeah.
What did you
No,
say?
that's what this,
A dry arahant.
Dry arahant.
As opposed to a wet one.
A lush.
Differentiate.
Yeah. So a dry arahant. I mean, like, you come across this term. Where is it from, Ken?
I think it's mostly Mahasi tradition is that.
Well, why did you bring that in, Ken? A dry arhat is somebody who develops wisdom through understanding dependent origination, but they don't have mastery over the jhanas. They have gone through jhanas, but they don't have mastery over the jhanas. Whereas somebody who's liberated in both ways can go in any jhana at will, go into cessation at will, and so on. So, liberated by wisdom, we did that one, right? The body witness.
Body what?
The body witness. So the body witness is anyone who is a stream enterer with fruition, all the way up to anagami with fruition, who's gone through the 4 jhanas and the 4 arupa jhanas. That's the body witness. The one attained to view is one who was a Dhamma follower, and I'll explain what that means, and becomes a stream enterer or beyond up until anagami with fruition. The one liberated by faith is a stream enterer with fruition all the way up to anagami with fruition. And the Dhamma follower is a stream enterer with path. And so is the faith follower. The difference between these two is the strength of their faculties. So there's the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of faith, the faculty of wisdom, the faculty of collectedness, and the faculty of mindfulness. So a faith follower, their faith faculty is much stronger, and they become a stream enterer. They can become a stream enterer upon hearing. Just being able to understand the impermanent nature of things and then realize, oh, okay, everything is impersonal, and then everything drops, and then they become a stream enterer with path. The Dhamma follower is somebody who cultivates the mindfulness and collectedness faculty more so. So in that sense, you could probably differentiate between the Dhamma follower and the faith follower in saying that the faith follower is one who's a stream enterer by path upon hearing or by having listened to the Dhamma. And the Dhamma follower is somebody who has attained it through jhana, let's say. Stream enterer with path. So they still need to attain fruition. And the other 3 after that, which we talked about, those are anyone who's a stream enterer with fruition all the way up to anagami fruition. So, yeah.
Kind of a dumb question. What exactly?
No, there's no dumb questions here.
What exactly is the difference between path and formation?
Yeah. So path is entering into that particular attainment. So there, the experience is you know, normally, let's say, You attain cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. You come out of it, and then you experience the dropping of the feathers. And by doing so, you attain stream entry. The fruition aspect is a repetition of that experience, which just locks in that attainment. That's why we were talking about yesterday. Somebody asked, if somebody is a stream enter with path, will they be able to lose it? And the understanding is no. If they don't attain fruition within this life, they will attain fruition at the end of that life.
So fruition is guaranteed if you make it onto the path?
Yes.
Is that for all attainments?
Yes.
Why?
Because when you die, or when you're dying, your mind goes to what was the most sublime state. And the most sublime state there was the experience of stream entry, for example.
Yeah.
And it drops everything and experiences the fruition.
I've seen it written that the fruition is one who has practiced at the path knowledge that they have. So they not only have the knowledge, but they implement that knowledge.
They implement that knowledge.
Yeah, and then at a certain point, it just becomes part of their karmic DNA.
Yeah.
And then then they have another experience equal to or maybe exceeding or something like that. So another big old wow.
Yeah. Any questions?
Will someone experience Nibbana for multiple times? Do they stay in there for a long time? Like, does the quality improve, or does the duration improve, or is there a difference?
I would say the clarity into understanding dependent origination improves. So when you experience Nibbana, it's a result of having seen dependent origination. Nibbana is Nibbana, but the insight into reality becomes much clearer with each attainment. So with the stream enterer, like for example, what's his name? Ananda, he experienced dependent origination, but he missed out on ignorance and formations in the sixth sense basis. But then later on, as you become as Sakadagami, you get more clarity on dependent origination. And when you get all the way to Arhatship, you see it in different ways. You can just understand it in different contexts, in different spaces, in different times, all kinds of ways. So the attainments give more clarity to dependent origination.
I have a bit of a cynical question. So these 7 persons are worthy of gifts and hospitality, and I mean, it just seems like it open for exploitation, right? Like, I went on a retreat, I became Suttavada with fruition.
Oh yeah.
So it's in your best interest to give me money or feed me or house me, because the rewards for you, my friend, are going to be so much more than what you give me.
The merit that you make.
Yes. That would be, the exploitative side.
Yeah.
I imagine people who have attainments won't run around telling people to give them stuff, right?
Exactly.
But, they might want to if they want their friends to benefit, right? In a non-exploitative way. Like, hey,
give it to me.
Give it to me.
One minute.
Yeah, trust me. And just.
Oh, that was just a comment.
Yeah. I'm just curious, like how. I have a hard time processing, like. Again, it just seems open to people taking advantage of this, and it just always makes me wary. Like when I first came to Buddhism, this idea of merit was very strange to me. I was not familiar with it, didn't grow up with it. So when they were saying like, feed the monks and you make merit, give them stuff, make merit, my gut reaction was like, well, that's convenient,
Oh, absolutely. It's a great social structure.
Yeah, and so I just, I was very cynical about it. I'm not now, but you know, again, as a newcomer to this, it just seemed very self-serving and convenient.
Oh yeah, absolutely, it is.
Is there another spin you can give on this for
No.
folks who might be unbelievers, have a hard time with it?
There's nibbana and then the nibbana element. And when you use those terms, are they interchangeable or is...
They are interchangeable.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed number 7. The last one was Dharma follower. What? No, I thought it was
Faith follower.
Faith follower is different from liberated by faith.
Yeah. Faith follower is a stream enterer with path. Liberated by faith is a faith follower who experiences stream entry with fruition and then beyond.
Is there, maybe this is for another occasion, so, is there anything beyond dependent origination? And could you talk about that sometime?
Yes.
Maybe not tonight.
No, maybe not tonight.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for. And are you going to talk about voidness? That's a big deal in sort of certain meditation circles. This might not be the night either, but I would like you to render that at some point.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Didn't you have something that you wanted to talk about from yesterday?
6
Oh, the 6 hours.
Yeah.
6 hours.
I can do a quick summary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So,
You want the mic?
no, I'll just use the mic. I'm from Wisconsin, so we talk loud. It's like Minnesota hay, you know, the movies. So the 6 R's had a genesis. So I'll start in the kind of middle and work both ways. So I first was introduced to it at a retreat in Joshua Tree, and Don, you were there. You were there, 2010, and it came out of something that was being used in the earlier Joshua Trees with Bhante Vimalaramsi at Ruth Dennison's Vipassana Center, right? And so he had used the word drops to help guide meditation. I put it up on the board. You know, don't resist or push, soften, smile. And I think it was maybe the year before that, he had a student that was using drops, and it was not as a learning device, it wasn't quite as good as what became known as the 6 R's. Okay, don't resist. Okay, I won't resist. So that is sort of like acceptance, right? And that's your recognize. Or push. So that is right effort, right? And so he got a note from a guy who came in to see him at an interview, and he said, drops. It's a good acronym, but here's how I like kind of practice it. And he came up with 5 R's. This is how it started. So, and that's the 6 R's. You know, recognize a hindrance when it's hijacked your mind, right? Release it. They were using kind of let go, but release it. So, okay. And then relax. And that has its genesis earlier on. And then that's the soften. Okay, it was softened, and then it sort of became relaxed. And then the re-smile. Okay, and that came from some metta work that Bhante was doing. And then return to your home base, right? And at that time we were using breath. I think before 2010 we were using the Anapanasati Sutta, and we were using relaxing on the in-breath, relaxing on the out-breath, relaxing on the in-breath, relaxing on the out-breath. And then in 2010, we changed to metta. And that, yeah, and so, and I had a heck of a time with that. That's another story. I couldn't do it. I had too much, like, you know, full lotus meditations to like feel any better. Anyway, so then after that retreat, they wrote it down, and then they put like, repeat the process whenever this happens, whenever you get distracted. And then they stuck it on and said, instead of 5 hours, they had to 6 hours.
Yeah.
So that is sort of where it came from. And the relaxed step came from Bhante Vimalaramsi meeting Bhante Punaji in Asia, who said maybe you wanted to stop following the teachings in the Visuddhimagga, which he and a bunch of us had done for years, decades, and try looking at the suttas. And he found this little passage in the Satipatthana in the sutta that said to tranquilize the bodily formations. And that bounced around in his head for weeks. And finally he said, I think it means to relax. And he tried it, and his mind just expanded, and then he went and experimented, and the rest is history. There's where the 6 hours come.
Now you know. So, any last questions? Anything else?
Another question, dependent origination.
Yeah.
So it seems like Buddhism is hard, and it's like no wonder so many people are in hell, because it seems like it's hard to get the right view, because it's not just, first of all, even if you just read dependent origination, that's super challenging. But the idea, the right view is not just being able to talk about it, right? The right view here is to actually have that experience, and that is, you know, so difficult, you know, to have. So it seems like just so few people, you know, are going to have that. It's like, oh my God, this is a really challenging religion. You know, if I were, you know, a Martian who came to Earth and was looking at a bunch of religions, which one should I follow? And I saw Buddhism, I'm like, well, this looks interesting. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute, I don't know if I'm going to get there, you know. I can just be Catholic and, you know, make a, you know, act of faith and I'm good to go, right? But here it's like, holy mother, like, I don't know if I'm going to make it, you know, at the end of all of this. So that's, I don't know if you can comment on that. It just leaves, it's a little unsettling. I find it a little bit unsettling, just how, I mean, it's the path, but it's like so hard to follow that path.
Well, actually, if you think about it, there's so many components to the Dhamma, right? There's the Eightfold Path, there's the Four Noble Truths, there's the 3 Marks of Existence, there's the 5 faculties, there's the 4 bases of psychic faculties, there's the 7 enlightenment factors, there's the 4 right efforts, there's the 5 aggregates, there's the 6 sense bases, or sometimes even 12 sense bases, if you want to go that route, and 12 links of dependent origination, and, spoiler alert, there's also the 12 links or 11 links of transcendental dependent origination.
Whoa!
But the thing about it is, if you just start with the understanding that you are suffering, that there is suffering, and you start to let go of that suffering, these things come to you organically. You try to analyze them and reflect on them and try to wrap your head around them. It becomes an intellectual exercise. But in order for you to actually have right view, you have to relax. You have to be able to use right effort. And once you start doing that, that's why I keep saying right effort is the heart of the Eightfold Path. It leads you from wrong view to right view, because it shows you where your suffering is causing your suffering. So right there and then, you're actually starting to see the first noble truth, and then the second noble truth, and an experience of Third Noble Truth by using the 6 R's or right effort. So if you start with that premise, then everything else kind of falls into place.
Okay. That's helpful.
So if you look at Buddhism as a religion, it is as useless as any other religion for the purpose of liberation.
Yeah.
And it's in church, mostly worldwide.
Right.
And every country has its own Buddhism.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
It just reminds me of one of the first things I learned about the Buddhism, this conversation you two are having, is that the biggest difference is that Christians love Jesus, Buddhists love lists.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
Perfect. Thank you.
Going back to right view, I thought there was like 3 elements to right view. It's like renunciation, so renunciation.
Oh, that's right intention.
That's right intention.
Yeah.
And that's no ill will and
right.
no harm.
There's 2 right views. There's the mundane right view and the super mundane right view. The mundane right view has to do with understanding that there is causation, there's cause and effect, that my actions, mental, verbal, bodily, have a repercussion. That's I mean, if you were to put it under one summation, that would be it. But the breakdown of that is there is mother and father, there are teachers who know this, there is meaning in giving, there is meaning in merit, and all these other things that are there. But it's all tied up to the understanding that there's cause and effect, there's causes and conditions. Then that opens up the right view of supramundane right view. Once you go through the whole path, it reinforms you of the 4 Noble Truths. So it installs in your mind the 4 Noble Truths, which happens at stream entry and then perfects at Arahant.
Just to give you some hope, I don't need to read any of those texts in order to practice.
There you go.
And I don't need to go through all of the intellectual stuff to reach Nirvana. Is that correct? Because every time I look at that, I'm like, my God, I don't think I can finish off by this lifetime. You know, it just seems so confusing, and there's so many entwined little stuff that I'm like...
In fact, I would say, like anyone who's a newcomer and reads the suttas, it's like a secret language that you're reading. You cannot make heads or tails out of it. But once you start practicing, and once you experience what we're talking about, and you go back to the suttas, it's like you have the codex, and now everything is sort of becoming clarified. And as your wisdom clarifies, and as you have different attainments, it becomes even more unlocked and more unpacked. And you look at the same statement, you realize, oh, I thought it was this when I had this attainment, but what they're really talking about is this, now that I have this attainment. So that's what's interesting about the suttas. But as you said, you don't need the suttas to start with. You just need the ability to practice right effort, which then will bring everything else into place.
This may be a little bit of a personal question. Like, do you understand Pali and Sanskrit?
Yeah.
And so when you read the suttas, in English, do you feel that they're an accurate representation of the translation, or just, would it be?
Yeah, sometimes I will change the translation a little bit just to give clearer context based on my understanding of Sanskrit and Pali. So, like the other day I was telling you, it talks about he pervades his entire body with the jhanic factors, what we were talking about day before yesterday. And I said there's two words for the word body. There's rupa, which is the physical, and there's the kaya, which is the mental body. So you wouldn't really be able to, and the average person, let's say, wouldn't be able to really know what the difference is unless they actually looked at the different words. And they would just mistake that for meaning the whole physical body.
For me, the sankhara is the most... To me, and this is my understanding, growing up in India and having seen this spoken even in normal Indian languages, you say, iske sanskar achhe nahi hai.
Yes.
So that to me kind of ties to character of a person,
Yes.
or what forms the character of a person. But
Yes.
somehow in the sutras that just doesn't seem, when
Yeah.
I listen to it in English,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like an accurate, or for me it doesn't seem to
Because
connect to
in,
that.
yeah, because in the Hindi, sanskara means character, sanskara means tradition.
Yeah.
Sanskara also means, yeah, basically that. Or it could also be the sanskaras, like the 16 sanskaras, the rituals. Have you heard of that? Okay. Or, but in the Sanskrit, or when you look at the Vedanta and the Hindu philosophies, they use samskara, but they use it in a different context. Samskaras there are understood. You know Vasana samskaras? Have you heard of those? So Vasana samskaras are basically mental impressions. They are the things that influence the mind. And in here, sankharas are basically the preparations, the formations that construct, or constructors that create your experience of the world, or influence your experience of the world. Now, sankharas could be equivalent to the understanding of synapses in the brain. When you change sankharas, you're pruning away certain synapses that are leading you to unwholesome choices and strengthening neural pathways that are leading you to wholesome choices. It could even lead, it could also be understood like the Ayu Sankhara can be understood as telomeres or genetic markers. So there's different ways of understanding the context of sankharas in the Buddhist context. Okay. I think we can share some merit now. May suffering ones be suffering free, and fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation.